Hey everyone, it's Deborah, and today we're going to talk about the one tool that you need in order to make money self-publishing, the title P&L. A title P&L is a profit or loss statement for your title, your book in all of its different formats. It's basically a budget for your book. Now I know what you're thinking, oh, budgeting, boring accounting stuff, oh, I hate budgets, budgets are scary. It's not just a budget. A title P&L is the magical formula that you need to understand if you want to make self-publishing your full-time thing, or at least not lose money doing it. Now, most people think of a P&L as some type of financial scorecard, which it is. On one side, you have income, and on the other side, you have your expenses. If your income exceeds your expenses, then you've got a profit. Otherwise, you've got a loss. There's actually a third situation you can be in, and that's break even, which is when your income is enough to cover your costs exactly. When people think about P&Ls, they're usually thinking of this bottom line number of whether or not they've made a profit. But I want you guys to think beyond that. Your title P&L is not just a financial scorecard. It's actually a scale. And if you understand what goes into this scale, you can learn how to tip those scales in your favor. Every single traditional publisher, from the big five all the way through to your indie publishers, use title P&Ls. There's like a million different ways out there, and I will put some links in the description below so you can see how some of the pros actually do it. A title P&L is the first thing that an acquiring editor will put together when they're thinking of acquiring a manuscript from an author. And the reason they need to do that is because they need to figure out how much of an advance to give that author. The title P&L is so important that it gets reviewed at least once a year, if not more often. I've seen them reviewed every 6 months on a quarterly basis, up to every single month at some of my publishing clients. And you don't need to be in self-publishing for the money in order to find this tool useful. It helps you understand where all your costs are and how to control them. So what actually goes into a title P&L and how do you put one together? Well, let's talk about the income side first. As I explained in my other video, the income side is really made up of two things: your recommended retail price times the number of copies sold. As the publisher, technically you control the RRP in that you're asked to set the RRP, but realistically your RRP is going to be dictated by the format of your book, the genre, and your target audience. And you can check out my other video as to why that is the case. The number of copies sold, however, you do have more control over this because it's a function of the demand for your book. Now, you actually control this. Because if you have a great book which solves a burning problem for your audience or your customers, your ultimate readers, if you have a fantastic cover, if you have a killer blurb, if you have a really solid marketing and promotion strategy, then you're gonna sell books. The question is, how many are you going to sell? And that's going to be a wild guess in the dark. Even the pros get this wrong all the time, so don't stress out too much about figuring that out exactly. Your job in terms of setting up your title P&L is to work out the number of copies you have to sell in order to get to your break-even point. Now, let's talk about the expense side of the equation because there's a lot more going on in here. There are three things I want to cover. The first is measuring them.
What do you mean by measuring them, Deb? Like, it's a number. Like, it's a number on the invoice that you pay for.
No, I want you to be really clear on the difference between cost, which is what you would have to pay a professional that you don't know to do something for you, or the amount of money you have to take out of your pocket in order to publish that book. Because when you're watching these other videos, they're going to give you all sorts of information about what it costs them, except in 90% of the cases, they are talking about what they actually paid out of pocket, and they're not factoring into all of these other things. At the beginning, it totally makes sense to minimize your cash outlay because getting into self-publishing is not exactly a cheap exercise, but eventually you should factor in cost, because when you look at pure cash outlay, quite often you're not actually including all of the time that you've spent working on the book when you haven't paid anybody else. And if you want to make a living self-publishing, that's not really a sustainable way to go. Eventually, you want to look at spending your time doing the things that only you can do and outsourcing parts to other people. The second thing I want to talk about with respect to expenses is that as a publisher, you exist at 3 different levels. So you've got you as the publisher, which if you're a sole trader like me, or you're just publishing in your own name as an individual, that's just you personally. Or you might be publishing through a company or an LLC or some other type of legal entity. So that's the publisher level, the business level. The second level is the imprint level. An imprint is basically a brand that you are publishing under. Now, your imprint may or may not be the same thing as your publishing company or you as a person. If you're thinking of writing for very different audiences or publishing very different books, you may have more than one imprint. So for example, I publish my kids' books under my imprint Cat-Like Studio, but eventually when I start writing fantasy books and self-publishing those, I'm probably going to do those under a different imprint because the two audiences don't really overlap much. So I want to keep all of that marketing and branding and stuff completely separate. Publisher and imprint level costs are generally kind of one-off costs or recurring costs. And these types of things are all things that you need to pay for in order to self-publish, but you can't actually pin them down to one particular title. As an example, if you are a member of an author association, that doesn't actually belong to any particular title. Other things are like an author website, buying equipment, so a computer or an iPad or software like Procreate, InDesign. Those things tend to be publisher level costs because that expense is really for you as a publisher. When you're putting together a title P&L, what you want to include are only your title level costs. And these are costs that you can pin down to a title in particular. And title level expenses come in 2 varieties as well. You've got fixed expenses, so these are expenses that don't change regardless of how many books you sell. You've also got variable expenses, which are expenses that you get charged every single time you sell a book. Editing, artwork, illustration, cover design, typesetting, marketing even, all of those things are fixed expenses at the title level because you set that on a per title basis, and regardless of whether you sell 1 copy or 10,000 copies, you're still paying the editor the same amount, you're still paying the typesetter the same amount. All these things are usually dictated by things like how long your book is, how many pages are, the level of service you're getting, things that have nothing to do with how many copies you're selling. On the other hand, you've got variable expenses like printing and distribution. So every single time you sell a book, it has to get printed. You need to pay the retailer their discount, the distributor their distribution fee, the ebook distributor their commission. All of those kinds of things are examples of variable title level expenses. There's a lot that goes into the expense side of a title P&L, so it can feel pretty overwhelming, but the good news here is you can actually have a lot of control over each and every one of these expenses. While you can't change, for example, the percentage commission fee that Amazon charges or the distribution fee that Ingram Spark charges, you can actually make decisions about what channels you're going to sell through. So for example, if you're going to be exclusive to Amazon, or if you're going to distribute on Amazon and Ingram as well as on your website, if you're going to go direct to the public, you have loads and loads of control over what exactly you do over distribution. So when you put your title P&L together, I would be focusing most of my time on the expense side of things. I would get some really good estimates. So for example, if I was hiring a cover designer, I would pick 3 that I liked and get some quotes. And I would work through all the different types of expenses that go into publishing a book line by line until I get a pretty clear picture of what my total cost is going to be. There is so much information out there on what all of these things cost that you can put together a really, really good estimate. I can then sit back at the end of it all and think about whether or not this is an amount of money that I'm comfortable gambling on this self-publishing venture. Because as I said in my previous video, publishing is basically gambling. So that total dollar amount, you need to be okay with not ever making any of it back. And where the title P&L becomes really powerful is when you're not happy with that total number, that dollar figure of what you're betting on this book is, you can actually work through each of those expense lines in your P&L and start making decisions about which ones you're going to cut back your spending on. If you want to learn more about how to do that, check out my other video on the ultimate strategy to figure out what you should be spending on your book. The most important thing about the title P&L is that you actually do it. So don't overcomplicate it. Just open up a spreadsheet and just start typing down the kinds of expenses that you're probably going to have to spend. That way, you're going to be able to put everything together and figure out what that break-even point is going to be for you and how many books you're going to need to sell in order to recoup the money that you've put into publishing your book. Thanks for watching, and if you enjoyed this video, please give it a like and subscribe for more videos like this on the business side of self-publishing. And let me know in the comments if you have any questions or suggestions for future videos. See you next time. Bye.